Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our 7th Duke New York Career Conversations. I'm Leanne O, class of 2015 Pratt and 2015 Graduate School, and also Duke New York board member. One of our roles as board members is to help connect our community of the Tri-State alumni and provide you with an opportunity to grow your Forever Duke networks and meet each other during these times, hopefully virtually, doing it through our Duke New York network. Please do turn your videos back on during the Q&A session so that we can make this as interactive as possible. And the group chat is open, so please send in more questions and comments or even self-introductions. Now, Koshie, thank you so much for joining us today. You graduated from Duke in 2002, and you're currently the Director in Operations and Engagement at Wirecutter, which is a New York Times company. Could you start off by just sharing with us how your career and how you are where you are today?
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you so much for Duke New York for having me today. I like to think of my career as happening in different phases. I started my career here in New York. I was the class of 2002, and I often say that 9/11 changed the trajectory of my career. A lot of the work that I thought I was going to do going into pharmaceutical sales, I had to sort of quickly pivot because the economy was so bad coming back home after college at that time. So, based on an internship that I got while I was at Duke through the Career Center, working for a magazine company called Vanguard Media, I worked in the circulation department there for one summer. And that was really what catapulted my career post 9/11 and post Duke. I started working for a publishing company, working on men's sophisticate titles in circulation and in marketing. And I built my career there on out, first at Blue Horizon Media and then spending several years at Time Inc. Before life changes again caused a pivot when I got married and moved to San Diego and had to rethink, what type of work and what my career would look like at that point. I decided to then work for a database marketing company, given my marketing background. Once I moved to San Diego and was in digital sales for a while, coming out at it after that. And then life events caused another pivot, bringing me back to New York when I had my son. So my family moved back to be closer to my parents. And I had to pull again on experiences that I had prior to moving to San Diego. And that brought me back into the publishing world, working for the New York Times. So that's sort of, I would say internships really helped to kick off my career. It was really important for me that I worked for companies that were mission driven and that did work that I could be proud of. So it's one of the reasons why I stayed in publishing and media for the vast majority of my career. And at the time, while my entree into the Times was through marketing, in the last several years, I've pivoted from marketing into operations. I've learned that I really enjoy working on details and understanding how to make teams work more efficiently and effectively. And so that sort of changed the pivot for me about 3 years ago when I started working for our executive leadership team and prepared me for the role that I have now at Wirecutter.
Great, thank you. I think it's really interesting that you said the word mission and going to a company that is mission driven. Because you worked at different companies, like you've probably seen a lot of companies that have different types of missions. Like, what do you mean when going to a company that aligns to the mission that you personally may have, or what is why is it important? Could you kind of talk about that?
Well, for me, we spend so much time at work, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing work that I felt would make a difference in the world, and working for companies that made a difference in the world. I was always, while myself, I'm not a writer, I was always attracted to the written word and how it could greatly change and influence people's lives, how it can bring understanding of the world that's happening around them. And that was something that I think, attracted me to all the companies, or most of the companies that I've worked for in my career, right? That they were grounded and rooted in things that I believed in, that they brought some level of understanding or happiness to the lives of the people that were engaging with them, and that I could find purpose working for those companies, given how much time we actually do spend at the office and away from our families. So that for me was something that was really important. And, you know, because it is media, it, you know, it has come with some sacrifice, right? These aren't, you know, sort of companies and careers where you go in to make, you know, lots and gobs of money. Though, you know, some people do, or the talent does, but I always felt good when I came home from work that I was doing, you know, work or part of a company's work that was actually sort of changing the world in a small way, or bringing happiness and value and perspective to people's lives. So for me, that was something that was really important. And I think it's one of the things that has motivated me over my career, is that I've been working for these companies that have strong mission statements and whose work is actually rooted in values that I believe in.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. And you said that you were, around the time you're looking for a job, it was around 9/11. You know, it was a different scenario back then compared to now, but similarly challenging time when someone's trying to start a career, particularly in New York right now. What led you to pursue a career in publishing back then? And what is the winning strategy to landing a job in an environment like this?
I'll take your first question. I think a lot of it really, as far as publishing, again, it started in necessity. You know, the life that I saw after Duke, I was going to pharmaceutical consulting and pharmaceutical sales. I would then go to business school, and I would probably end up working for some sort of management consulting firm. That was sort of where my head was, and that was kind of the track that I think a lot of us were on when I was in college. You know, those of us that were not going to either law school or medical school, right, or doing something in the sciences. That was definitely a track that me and a lot of our friends were taking. And I think, you know, the shock to the economy that 9/11 provided, it required us to pivot and to calibrate. And I was lucky enough that I did do quite a bit of, you know, I did several internships while I was at Duke that allowed me and afforded me an experience that I could fall back on at a time when a lot of those, you know, companies, you know, management consulting firms, pharmaceutical companies, they weren't hiring at that time. You know, finance, there were no jobs in finance at that time, or very few. So because I did have this, I did do this internship working at a media company, as a magazine company. And it was a sort of an analytical role, working in the circulation department. It actually gave me a leg up in the marketplace, because those are the places that were hiring at the time. Ironically enough, I found my first job in the classified section of the New York Times, and I actually still have the newspaper page where I saw that job for the magazine company. So that's sort of the internship itself was something that I was really obviously happy and grateful and thankful that I had done, because it gave me some experience in the work that would end up becoming, you know, most of where I would spend a lot of my career. And the career network and the career center at Duke was really, really sort of pivotal in helping me both to find the internship, but also to connect me to other alumni, you know, during those summers who were doing similar work to me. So I was able to have, you know, a bit of a built-in network when I came back to New York, of people that I could call on to find, you know, the jobs. I was grateful enough that both Duke and the alumni department through my high school actually was able to provide that for me. Your second question was about sort of how to find or navigate these sort of challenging times, particularly when the market isn't doing well, or, you know, and for me, it's always been being able to fall back on, you know, the network that I do have. Networking has always, you know, I personally am an extrovert, so networking has always been really, really critical for me in my career, making connections, managing and maintaining these connections over the years, particularly when I was living in San Diego and I had to basically start from scratch in a relatively new field and learn a lot of apply my marketing skills in this new digital environment at the time. Being able to call upon people to ask for their advice, not just to find out if they knew of, to roles that were open, but if they could offer me advice about how to pivot, from jobs and doing slightly different things, if they could connect me to other people in their network, and to expand the, sort of like the circle of folks that I had access to. Those are two things that were really, really critical for me. And frankly, just putting yourself out there. One of the things that I have done, at least through, with Duke, was I was very active with we had a sort of an alumni directory, which has now become part of the network, for Duke. I made sure that I went in and I updated my information, and I opened myself up to not just only talk to current students, but also to make connections through alumni as well. And so I've been lucky enough to pull on not just my professional network, but also my Duke network, both inside and outside of the media industry, as I've been able to expand my career.
Great, thank you. And before this call, we actually had a call between us and just to learn more about you. And I think something that you said was that before COVID, your role or in a lot of the employees at the Wirecutter was remote, right? And especially with COVID and most people working remotely, and just kind of thinking about your role as a director of operations and engagement, you're improving the effectiveness of the company and its operations. Like, how do you do that remotely with COVID and everything that's happening in the world? Like, how do you make things more efficient and effective at such a difficult time like this right now?
Well, interestingly enough, Wirecutter as a company, the vast majority, upwards of 70% of our company was permanently was a permanent remote workforce prior to COVID, right? So we already had, in a lot of ways, mastered the tools of connection, and our employees that were remote had a lot of the tools that they needed to do their work. So we weren't like a lot of other companies, or even like the Greater Times itself, who had to sort of provide tools for employees who sort of found themselves at home. Some of the biggest issues, though, when you are a majority remote work culture and remote organization that we're dealing with is one, as it relates to COVID, fluctuations in productivity. So now not only are our people working from home, but we have quite a few folks whose children or their they had new dependent care responsibilities as a result of the crisis they didn't have before. So how do we manage team productivity? We had to make shifts to sort of meeting times, to make sure that folks had more access to each other, given the fact that folks were also doing digital school. We had to really think about sort of what our workday schedule would look like for those folks who have these new dependent care responsibilities. We also had to rethink our own productivity tools and the tools that we use in the office. So Zoom became a very big, it has always been a big part of sort of life at Wirecutter, but how do we make these engagements more interactive? How do we, we had to learn how to use all of the sort of like the functionality and that Zoom can provide, breakout rooms when you're going from larger meetings to smaller meetings in ways that we probably hadn't had to use before. Slack was another way where we had to really expand our Slack culture as a result of the crisis. So you had folks who, the 25 to 30% of the folks who were actually going into our Long Island City office now had to recalibrate. And for the team itself that I manage in operations and engagement, a lot of the work that we do as a team is actually tied to our physical facility. We manage a lot of the product testing and logistical support for a lot of that. So you're moving product now all across the country. And it just sort of required us to rethink a lot of our processes as a result of that. The engagement piece is actually a new capability that we're standing up at Wirecutter right now. So how do we think about, for, you know, the Times acquired Wirecutter a few years ago. Wirecutter was a startup. It was scrappy. The folks who worked there were really, really, you know, sort of tied to the mission. And then they became part of this larger organization. So, you know, the interaction and the engagement, how do we provide Wirecutter employees access to New York Times resources and tools became a big thing for us. I'm just thinking through some of like our Google integrations and again, using technology to make these connections. What type of culture are we providing, career opportunities? So a lot of that we have to recalibrate and rethink, you know, in light of the fact that this one startup is now a maturing company that's part of this larger organization. So there are a lot more, you know, sort of things that we never had to think about before that weren't as important or as critical to the well-being of our employees. And then obviously, you know, all of the work and that's been happening in the world over the last 2 weeks has really made us rethink sort of what does inclusion mean at Wirecutter, what types of career opportunities are we providing for women and people of color? Are we set up to provide some of the, you know, sort of additional resources and how are we interacting and engaging with our consumers as well, given sort of the moment that we find ourselves in. So these are all new challenges for us, just like other companies are trying to work through.
Great, thank you. And I think we're now gonna go open up our screen so that everybody else who's part of our conversation today can join in. So if everybody can share your video, we'd really appreciate to make this more engaging, and we're going to go into the Q&A section. We actually got a lot of questions through email, and one thing that really struck me that I'd love to ask you is, so as a female executive of color, what were some of the roadblocks that you have encountered? How did you overcome them? And what have you been advocating for to help bring about more equality, especially in a large traditional organization like the New York Times?
Great question, whoever asked that. So, you know, for me, one of the things that's been, have I had challenges being a woman of color, an executive at the table? Sure. I think also a lot of it, you know, a lot of my career choices, as I mentioned earlier, quite frankly, were made because of family choices that I had to make. You know, when I got married, when I had children, I think in ways that men don't often have to sort of think about and prepare for. And those life choices, you know, have had me, you know, has made me have to pivot a lot in my career. And being a Black woman, I'm usually the only person of color that's in the room, that's in meetings, particularly, you know, working in marketing and in operations at the Times. So those, you know, sort of, you know, typical things like you feel like you have to represent the entire, you know, all Black people and all people of color. You're advocating for these issues. You're dealing with microaggressions from people who may or may not even realize that they have biases and prejudices. The way that I've been able to navigate those in my career, again, it's really about having really, really strong mentors who I've been able to rely on and to call on to help me navigate some of those issues, having advocates in the office place, and it requires you to put yourself out there and you know, sort of really reach out to senior leaders and demand that they give you the time as an employee. One small example that I'll give you, Arthur Sulzberger, who was he's the chairman of our board and former publisher at the Times. He's kind of, you know, really, really smart guy, but a little socially awkward. But, you know, he rides the elevator and he eats lunch in the cafeteria, just like everybody else does. But many people, they get in the elevator with him, they've never really talked to him, and he may give an awkward joke to sort of break the silence and no one really engaged. And one day I, laughed at one of his jokes, and, we ended up starting an elevator conversation that lasted for about 2 years. He gave me some of the best, parenting and child rearing advices ever when I actually went through my divorce. He was also, gave me a lot of great advice navigating that. He was married to a Black woman, so he could understand sort of, what it was like for me, walking these halls and doing the work that I do. And ironically enough, when the chief of staff role opened up for Mark Thompson, our CEO, I served as his chief of staff for about 2.5 years. I know for a fact that Arthur was one of the people that was in the room that was able to advocate for me. And I think it just goes to show that, putting yourself out there, setting up the lunches and the coffee meetings with folks so they understand the work that you're doing and so that your boss's boss knows what you're doing is really, really important, particularly if you are, in my view, if you're a part of an underrepresented group, because oftentimes you do have to advocate for yourself and you have to do so boldly. And that, I think, has always has been a big help for me in my career. The last part of that question was sort of, what am I working on right now to sort of help and advance, the opportunities that BIPOC people have at the New York Times. And a lot of it for me started through the work that I was doing through our Black employee ERG group before I sort of was in leadership, working to make sure with our HR department to make sure that all of our hiring practices were fair, that we had diverse interview slates. That was a big push that our Black ERG group, advocated for at the time, that our interview panels were diverse as well. Black at NYT was also instrumental in making sure that Mark, our CEO, signed on to CEO action. He took these three, he committed the Times to these, to pledge around these sort of DEI issues. And a lot of that really helped to advance some of the work, at least on the business side. The newsroom is quite different. And sort of developing a recruitment toolkit that hiring managers sort of had a checklist of things they had to look at, and they had to go through in order to make sure that they were getting diverse candidates that were coming in, and they were considering this. All of our hiring managers have to go through unconscious bias training. Many of our departments and teams have now expanded that to all managers as well, and that's something that I'm doing at Wirecutter. We've also implemented for things like mid-year reviews and annual reviews and sort of promotion conversations. There are checklists that managers sort of have to go through. There's a 6-module training session that we've recently implemented, so that when folks are making these decisions, they are considering the work of all people that are on their teams. We've also done a lot around sort of like scaling and calibrating title, making sure that we do a pay equity study every other year to make sure that there aren't any anomalies in the way that we think about the pay. A lot of the DEI issues sort of at the time show up in this question of fairness around our hiring practices, the career opportunities that we make available, who has access to stretch projects and how they're being considered. So, doing things like making sure that all open roles, both internal, are posted both internally and externally, that you always have an internal candidate. We've expanded our mentoring program, and we have a sponsorship program in our technology department that's specifically designed for women and people of color, to make sure that when we think about that we've got candidates that are prepared for when we start to look at succession planning for leadership. Is it enough? Do we move fast enough all the time in implementing a lot of this stuff? No. But from when I started at the Times in 2014 to where we are now, I can point to some marked improvements. And we don't always get it right. I mean, as I'm sure the last couple of weeks, particularly in our newsroom, have exposed, but it is something that I do feel like as a leader, as a leadership team, both at Wirecutter and then with the Times more broadly, that we are, working with. But it's not easy work. We're struggling in the same way that a lot of other companies are struggling around these issues as well.
Wow, Koshie, just listening to you, the first thing is I know I need to be more proactive and set up those lunches. And two, I need to go work at the Wirecutter because there's things happening at the Wirecutter. So we have a question from the audience, and I think this would be really helpful to know, like, what are some actionable ways someone can network that might be less of an extrovert? And I think kind of like adding on to that, especially like if you're not an extrovert, and you mentioned that internships are really critical for you, especially going into your career, like what can someone do now, especially because internships are not readily available this summer?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Those are two really good questions. Thank you for folks that ask those. I think for folks that are not extroverts, I think a lot of companies and organizations, I always start at the ERG level because I often feel like those are untapped opportunities for employees, both sort of to fellowship with other colleagues, to meet colleagues from across the company, right? Because they tend to be cross-functional in nature, but they also provide leadership opportunities in ways that sometimes the position or role that you're working in, you won't be able to have access to, right? You're managing projects, you are working with different, cohorts and committees of colleagues to develop policy initiatives, perhaps for your team to advance the work for whatever the ERG cohort that you support. So you're building a lot of the skill sets that's considered important. That'll help you in your career. And I know at the Times, one of the things that we've done is we're starting to strengthen what it means to be part of an ERG, particularly what it means to be in a leadership role in the ERG. We're trying to give those folks more access to senior leadership or making sure that they're part of the mentoring program. And so I think that's a pretty sort of like a low-hanging fruit, easy way to get access to folks that you probably wouldn't have access to through your normal work. It allows you to meet other colleagues from across the organization, where you get to hear and understand some of the work that they're doing in an informal, usually social way. And you're actually working on, at least at the Times, the way our ERGs are structured, they all have executive sponsors that they're meeting with, folks from our senior leadership team and our publisher and CEO, our C-suite level folks who serve as executive sponsors for these groups. So they're getting access to leadership in a way that they normally wouldn't, and you're actually putting together proposals that are advancing sort of the work and the support systems that are available for those cohorts and groups. So I always think that that's a great way to build some of those soft skills and to do it in a way that is fun and social and interesting. So I always sort of give that as sort of like one way for folks who may not be as extroverted to be able to gain access and to network with other people. I forget the other question, I'm sorry.
So during this COVID period, if someone's looking for internships, like what is the best way? Especially because it seems like internships are so critical for you as well.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, it's one of the things that sort of I'm the saddest. I'm the saddest. I feel the saddest about because I know at the Times and at Wirecutter we've actually had to shrink our internship opportunities. We do actually have them, and a lot of companies still are doing them. They just function in a very different way. So I still encourage you, if there are companies out there that you're interested in and that you have access to, still look up and still go to their websites and see what their internship programs look like. Because, obviously, particularly for this year, a lot of folks either had to recalibrate what the program would look like, or they actually had interns slated earlier on that they're actually trying to now repurpose. And, the way that we're using them at Wirecutter is that, because they tend to be more digitally savvy and nimble, they're also working remotely. They have experience working in a lot of the technology tools that we're using that really sort of drive the efficiency in the work. They've been welcome additions. I mean, yes, we have had to shrink the number, but I do think that there are some opportunities that are there and available. If they're not available, I often say to people, reach out to folks that that are doing the work that you want to do, or reach out to the Duke through your Duke network. Go online through the network and connect with alums that are in those positions, and just send them emails and start small that way. Just say, hey, I'm a Duke student. I'm a recent graduate. I'm an alum that's out of work. I'm trying to, sort of understand the work that you do. I have learned two things in my professional career. People love to talk about themselves, and they'll talk about the work that they're doing. And that Duke alums love to connect with other Duke alums. And so, that has always been a surefire way for me to at least get an entree into the industry or the type of work that I'm looking to do as a sort of an alternative to internships now. Even though I haven't been as responsive myself, I'm sorry, but folks still reach out, whether it's through the network or LinkedIn.
Well, Koshie, thank you so much for your time. I mean, I think everything you shared, it just shows that you've had an incredible journey, but also it comes with a lot of hard work and being proactive. So thank you for sharing your narrative and your experience, and just for your time today. So thank you everybody also for joining. We'll have this recording, so you can always check it out on Duke New York LinkedIn. And so everybody have a good rest of your night.
And everyone should feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. It will take me some time to get back to you, but I will get back. It may be a few days, but I will get back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Koshie.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you. Take care, everybody.